I worked in a hospital for 11 years before I started locking my bedroom door at night. Not because of anything that happened at the hospital, or not directly, but because of what I saw in the weeks after I left, and what I eventually understood had been following me home long before I ever thought to look. I was a night shift orderly at Carver Regional Medical Center in a mid-sized city in the southeast. And I want to be precise about that because people assume things about hospitals that are not true. They assume hospitals are clinical and bright and controlled. They are none of those things at 3 in the morning. At 3 in the morning, a hospital is a place where the lights hum at the wrong frequency and the hallways stretch longer than they should and the sounds coming from behind closed doors are not always the sounds of sick people. I know how that reads. I am not a superstitious person. I am someone who spent a decade mopping floors and transporting bodies and sitting with patients who had no one else to sit with them. And in that time, I developed a tolerance for the uncomfortable that most people never have to build. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what I am about to describe was not a product of an overactive imagination or sleep deprivation or the particular psychological pressure that comes from working in a place where people die regularly. I know what those things feel like. This was different. The patient in room 4 North 12 was admitted in October of my last year at Carver. I did not know her name for the first 2 weeks because she had come in without identification, found unresponsive in a parking lot off the highway. And the name the staff eventually assigned her for record-keeping purposes was a placeholder, something administrative and forgettable. She was in her mid-50s by the attending physician's estimate, though he admitted later that he had found her difficult to age with any confidence. She had no visible injuries. Her blood work came back with results that the lab ran twice because they did not believe the first set, and then ran a third time and said nothing definitive. She was breathing on her own. Her eyes were open approximately 80% of the time across any given hour. She did not speak. She did not respond to stimuli in the ways that neurological assessments would predict. She was not, by any clinical measure that the hospital could apply, in a coma. She was simply somewhere else. My first direct encounter with her was routine. I had been asked to bring a clean set of linens to 4 North and to replace the ones on the bed in 12 while the nursing staff handled a situation 2 rooms down. I had done this hundreds of times. I went in, and she was lying on her back with her eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. And I did what I always did with unresponsive patients, which was to speak to them as I worked, to narrate what I was doing in a low voice. Because the research on unconscious awareness is substantial, and I had always felt it was a decent and practical thing to do. I told her my name. I told her I was going to change the sheets and that I would try not to disturb her too much. I told her it was a quiet night, which it was. When I reached across the bed to tuck the sheet under the far side of the mattress, she turned her head and looked directly at me. Not in the slow, searching way that some patients move when they are emerging from sedation. Directly, precisely, as if she had been waiting for me to get close enough. I straightened up. I looked at her. Her eyes were pale, the kind of pale that you see in old photographs where the color processing has gone wrong. And they were focused on my face with an attention that I can only describe as professional, as though she were studying me for a purpose. I said her placeholder name. I asked if she could hear me. I asked if she was in pain. She did not respond to any of it, but she did not look away either. And after about 30 seconds, she turned her head back toward the ceiling with the same precision she had used to look at me. And that was all. I finished the sheets and left and wrote nothing in the log because there was nothing clinical to write. She had moved her head. That was all. What I did not write down, and what I have told very few people, is that when she looked at me, I felt something shift in the room. Not a temperature drop, not a sound, nothing that I can attach to a physical sensor. It was more like a pressure change, The way the air feels different when a door to the outside opens in winter. Except there was no door and no winter air, and the pressure did not come from any direction I could identify. It came from her. Over the next 3 weeks, I was in that room 7 or 8 more times. I began to notice things. The first was that the other staff avoided the room in ways they did not seem conscious of. Nurses who were meticulous about their rounds would find reasons to send someone else. The physician who had admitted her began to conduct his assessments more quickly than he did with other patients on the floor, never staying longer than 4 or 5 minutes. And when I asked him once in the break room what he made of her case, he looked at me and said she was stable, and then changed the subject so smoothly that it took me until I was back on the floor to realize he had not answered the question. The second thing I noticed was that she was always awake when I came in and always oriented toward wherever I entered from, regardless of what direction that was. 4 Northwell had a standard single door, and I always used it. But twice I entered from the small connecting supply closet that had an interior door to her room, a door that was almost never used, and both times she was already facing it when I opened it. The third thing was the drawings. Someone, and I could not determine who, had left a legal pad and a pencil on the table beside her bed. When I first noticed it, the pad was blank. The second time I noticed it, there were marks on the first page, light and uncertain, like someone learning to use their hand again. By my 6th visit, the drawings were precise and covered 12 pages. They were floor plans, not of the hospital, or not only of the hospital. I recognized the general layout of the 4th floor in one of them. The nursing station positioned correctly, the room numbers in the right sequence. But the rest of the drawings were of spaces I did not recognize. Long corridors with rooms branching off at irregular intervals. A large room with what appeared to be a central structure that I could not identify. Stairs that led to levels that were not labeled. And in several of the drawings, in the margins and occasionally in the center of a room, a small figure drawn in the same precise hand as the floor plans, standing in the same posture in each iteration. The figure had its head turned to one side. The figure was looking at something that was not in the frame. I told myself she had recovered more motor function than the assessments indicated, and that she was drawing from memory or imagination. I told myself this with some conviction for about 4 days. Then I went back and looked at the drawings again more carefully, and I found my name, not written as text, encoded in the room numbers, the first letter of each room number in sequence across 3 of the floor plans, spelled out twice in full, and once with only the first and last letters, and the middle ones replaced with a dash that coast could have been stylistic and almost certainly was not. I left that job 6 days later. I did not tell anyone why. I gave a reason about a family situation that was partially true and partially a thing I said because I needed to leave immediately and did not want to have a conversation about it. I moved to a city 600 miles away. I stayed with a cousin for 2 months and then rented an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a locked entrance. I started locking my bedroom door. Not because it would stop anything that needed stopping, but because I needed the 3 seconds of warning. The sound of a lock being worked is different from the sound of a door simply opening, and 3 seconds is long enough to be awake. And being awake is the only preparation I have ever been able to think of that seems even marginally relevant. I do not know what she was. I do not know if she is still in that hospital, or if she has been discharged, or if she ever existed in the category of person that the word discharged applies to. I have not contacted Carver Regional. I have not tried to find out. I have read enough in my life to know that there are phenomena that resist the frameworks we apply to them, and that the appropriate response to something you cannot categorize is not to keep approaching it until you can. 3 seconds is what I have. I keep the door locked. I have not stopped being afraid, but I have learned to be afraid quietly, which is the closest I have come to peace. I found the dog on a Tuesday, which is the kind of detail that shouldn't matter, but does. Because Tuesday was the day I always drove home through Mercer Road instead of the highway. And if I had taken the highway, I never would have seen it standing at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, watching my headlights with eyes that caught no reflection at all. Most animals throw back light. Raccoons, deer, cats, their eyes go bright and electric in the beam. This dog's eyes stayed flat and dark, like two holes pressed into its skull. And I slowed without deciding to slow, the way your body sometimes makes choices before your mind catches up. It was large, maybe shepherd-sized, with fur the color of wet concrete, and it didn't flinch at the engine or the light. It just stood there with its head slightly lowered and its legs too straight. The way a poorly articulated toy stands when you can't get the joints to bend correctly. I told myself it was lost. I told myself someone was missing it. I kept driving. The next morning, I found muddy paw prints on my back porch, which faced a yard enclosed by a 6-foot wooden fence with a latched gate. A fence I had built myself and trusted completely until that moment. The prints were large, larger than I expected from the animal I had seen, and they led to the sliding glass door and stopped there, as though whatever made them had stood at the glass for a while before leaving. Though there were no prints leading away, only the ones arriving, which I spent a long time trying to explain through wind and rain and the selective attention of a tired mind. I told my neighbor Karen about the dog. She was quiet in the way people are quiet when they recognize something they don't want to discuss. And then she said there had been a dog like that in the neighborhood a few years before I moved in. She said it had belonged to a man named Ellsworth who had lived in my house, the house I was now renting, and that the dog had disappeared around the same time. Ellsworth had a breakdown and was taken to a facility about 40 miles north. She didn't say what kind of facility. I didn't ask. I installed a camera on the back porch that same afternoon. For 11 days, the camera recorded nothing unusual. Squirrels, a possum on the 4th night, the particular way the oak tree moved in different speeds of wind. On the 12th night, the camera recorded 4 hours of static, beginning at 2:17 a.m. and ending at 6:04 a.m., which is not supposed to happen with the model I bought because it stores footage locally on a card, and static is not a condition that model produces under any documented malfunction. The card showed no corruption. The other 20 hours of footage from that night were clean. I called the manufacturer and a woman walked me through every possible technical explanation, and at the end of the call she paused and said, "That really shouldn't happen," and I could tell she meant it as a professional assessment and not as comfort. That was the night I first heard the sound from the basement. I had a basement I rarely used, concrete floor, single bulb on a pull cord, the usual collection of things the previous tenant had left and I had never sorted through. The sound was rhythmic, not loud, a kind of slow dragging that moved in a pattern I eventually recognized as the length of the room, wall to wall and back again, like something pacing. I stood at the top of the stairs with my hand on the door for what I believe was close to 4 minutes before I opened it. The bulb was already on, which it should not have been because I had not pulled the cord in at least 2 weeks. The basement was empty. The concrete floor had no marks on it, no drag lines, no disturbance of the dust. And the dust was thick enough that any movement would have left evidence. There was a smell, low and damp and organic, that faded while I stood there. The way a smell fades when its source is removed. I checked the crawlspace access panel and it was sealed from the inside. The small hook and eye latch set in the closed position, which meant either it had been that way when I moved in and I had never noticed, or something had fastened it from within the crawlspace. I did not open it. I left the basement and turned off the bulb and went upstairs and did not sleep. I looked up Ellsworth the following week. His full name was Gerald Ellsworth, and he had lived in my house for 9 years before he was hospitalized. I found a brief mention of him in a local paper from 4 years prior. A human interest piece about community members who had fallen on hard times. The article described him as a retired surveyor who had become, in the reporter's careful phrasing, increasingly withdrawn following the death of his companion animal. The companion animal was the dog. The article did not say how the dog had died. It said Ellsworth believed the dog had come back. It quoted a neighbor, unnamed, who said Ellsworth had stopped sleeping and had begun leaving food on his back porch at night, and that the food was always gone by morning. Though the neighbor attributed this to raccoons and said so in a tone the article described as gentle. The article said Ellsworth had told his sister the dog was in the house, that it had come back different, that it stood outside rooms and waited. I read the article 4 times, and then I sat with it in the way you sit with information that rearranges previous information. And I thought about the porch and the camera and the basement and the smell. And then I thought about the crawlspace latch set from the inside. And then I stopped thinking and called my landlord and asked about the history of the property in a way. I tried to make sound casual, asking about renovations and previous tenants. And he said Ellsworth had been a good tenant and that the house had been empty for 8 months before. I took the lease and that he hoped I was comfortable there. I did not tell him what I was thinking. That night, I put a bowl of water on the back porch. I don't know why I did it. I think I was trying to make a decision about what I believed, and the bowl was a kind of test one gave myself. An acknowledgement that some part of me had moved past explaining and into something else. In the morning, the bowl was dry and the porch was clean and there were no prints, and I felt a relief that lasted until I opened the refrigerator and found the smell again. The same damp, organic smell from the basement, filling the cold air of the refrigerator with no visible source. No spoiled food, nothing out of place. Just the smell sitting inside the cold, like something that belonged there. I moved out 17 days later. I told the landlord it was a job relocation, which was partly true since I had applied for a transfer months before, and it had come through at a convenient moment. I packed efficiently, and I did not go back to the basement, and boss, I did not look at the back porch camera footage from the final 2 nights. Which I am aware is a choice that leaves things unresolved in a way that might seem strange. I understand why a person would want to know. I understood it at the time, and I chose differently, because there is a particular kind of knowledge that closes a door that was better left open. And I had been alone in that house for 6 months, and I had slept in it and eaten in it, and I needed to be able to continue doing those things in whatever house came next. And watching that footage felt like the kind of thing you cannot unwrap from yourself once you've done it. I deleted the app and mailed the camera card to the manufacturer with a note explaining the static event and asking for their engineering team to examine it, which I realize was a strange thing to do but felt like a responsible one. They never responded. I live in an apartment now in a different city. It is on the 4th floor and has no basement and no back porch and no yard. And the building has cameras in the lobby and the stairwells that record continuously and have never produced static. I don't dream about the dog exactly. I dream about a room I am outside of, a door with light under it, and the sense of something on the other side that is not waiting for me to open the door, but is simply present. The way a fact is present, the way something true is present, whether or not you choose to look at it. I wake from these dreams without fear, which is almost worse, because it suggests my mind has made a kind of peace with the thing that I have not consciously agreed to make, and I find myself wondering what Ellsworth understood by the end. After the months of it, after the food left out and the sleeping stopped, what specific understanding a person arrives at when they stop calling it a malfunction and stop calling it a coincidence and stop calling it anything at all. When they simply adjust their life around the presence of a thing they cannot explain and cannot leave and cannot name. And whether that understanding was a relief or whether it was the last stable thing to go. I found the first mark on the wall 3 days after moving in, and I told myself it was nothing. A scratch left by the previous tenants, a nail hole filled poorly. The kind of imperfection you accept when you rent a place that costs less than it should. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had no elevator and smelled of damp concrete from the stairwell up. My neighbor across the hall, an older woman named Mrs. Farwell, had watched me carry boxes through the door without offering to help, which I appreciated because I didn't want conversation. I wanted silence, and the apartment gave me that, or seemed to at first. Asterisk, the mark was on the inside of the closet in the bedroom, low on the wall, about 2 feet from the floor. It looked like a tally. 4 vertical lines crossed by a diagonal. I counted it once, told myself it was 5 days someone had marked before a vacation, and closed the door. I unpacked my kitchen things. I set up my bed. I hung one photograph on the living room wall. A picture of my sister taken 4 years ago before she moved to another country. And I made coffee and stood at the window watching the street below, and felt, for the first time in months, something close to calm. Asterisk, that night, I slept badly. Not because of anything I saw or heard, but because of a smell. It was faint and came and went, something organic and dense. Like soil after rain, but with something underneath it, something sweeter and wrong. I got up twice to check the kitchen, thinking I had left something out, but the counters were bare. I opened the window and the outside air came in, and the smell faded, and I slept asterisk. In the morning, it was gone entirely. I made a note to check the drain under the bathroom sink, which sometimes harbored mold in old buildings, and then I forgot about it. I had work. I had calls to return and a project 3 days past its deadline, and the smell seemed like the kind of problem that didn't exist in daylight. I worked until 8 in the evening, ate something from a can, and went to bed. Asterisk, I noticed the second mark on a Thursday, 9 days after I moved in. I had gone into the closet to retrieve a jacket I hadn't worn since autumn, and when I pushed the hanging clothes aside, I saw the wall clearly for the first time since that first day. There were 2 tally sets now. 10 marks total. I stood there holding the jacket and looking at the wall for what I think was a full minute. I had not put them there. I was certain of this, in the way you are certain of things when the alternative explanation is not something your mind will accept yet. I studied them. The lines were the same depth, the same color, scratched into the paint with something narrow. They were not new. The second set looked as old as the first. Asterisk, I asked Mrs. Farwell in the hallway that please slipped afternoon if she knew anything about the previous tenants. She looked at me with an expression that took a moment to read. Something between caution and a decision being made, and said only that there had been a young man. That he had lived alone, that he had not lived there long. I asked why he left. She said she didn't know. She went back inside before I could ask anything else, and I heard 2 locks engage from the other side of her door. Asterisk, I searched the landlord's name online that evening and found nothing unusual. I searched the building address and found nothing. I told myself people move all the time. I told myself old buildings accumulate marks from dozens of tenants across decades. I went to bed. Asterisk, what woke me that night was not a sound, but the absence of one. I'd been a light sleeper since childhood and had learned to register the ambient noise of wherever. I slept as a kind of background texture. The building had its sounds. The heating pipes knocked at irregular intervals. Traffic from the street filtered up, muffled and intermittent. At some point past midnight, I woke and lay still in the dark and understood that I was hearing nothing at all. Not silence in the ordinary sense, but a total cessation, as though the city outside had simply stopped. I lay there for perhaps 4 minutes, and then a car passed on the street below. and the pipes knocked once, and everything resumed. And I told myself I had dreamed the stillness and went back to sleep. Asterisk in the morning, I found the closet door open. I always closed it. I had a habit, almost a compulsion, of closing every door in whatever space I occupied. I closed it, showered, made coffee, and sat with my laptop and tried to work, and could not. I kept thinking about the marks. I went back to the closet and counted them again. 2 sets of 5, 10 marks. I took a photograph on my phone. Asterisk, I did not sleep well for the next 4 nights. The smell returned on the second of those nights, stronger. And I got up and went through every room with my phone's flashlight. Opening cabinets, pulling the refrigerator slightly from the wall. Checking the bathroom ceiling for water stains. I found nothing. The smell was worst in the bedroom and faded in the hallway and was gone entirely in the kitchen. I opened the bedroom window and stood in the cold air coming off the street until the smell thinned enough that I could lie back down. I left the window open. I slept with my coat across the blanket, asterisk, on the 5th morning. I went back to the closet and stood in front of the wall with my phone and pulled up the photograph I had taken and compared it to what I was seeing. There were 3 tally sets now. 15 marks. My hands were steady when I looked at them, and I thought, with a strange detachment, that I should call someone. I did not know who. I called my sister, who lives in a different time zone, and woke her up and told her what I was seeing. She was quiet for a moment and then said to call the landlord. I called the landlord. I described the marks. He was quiet for a moment and then said he would send someone to look at the walls. No one came. Asterisk, I began sleeping with the bedroom light on. I began checking the closet wall every morning and every evening and photographing it each time, building a record I didn't know what to do with. The marks did not appear every night. For days passed without change, and I began to convince myself I had miscounted. That the second set had always been there. That stress and poor sleep had distorted my memory. Then, on the 9th day, there were 4 sets, 20 marks. I sat on the floor of the closet and looked at them and understood, in a clear and functional way, that something was happening that I could not explain, and that my choices were to leave or to stay. Asterisk, I stayed because I did not fully believe it yet, or because I believed it and did not know what leaving would mean, or because I am the kind of person who requires a complete accounting before acting. I bought a small camera and mounted it inside the closet, angled at the wall, running continuously. I watched 12 hours of footage over 2 days and saw nothing. The marks were there at the start of the recording. No hand appeared. No movement at all. And yet the next morning there were 5 sets. 25, I watched the footage again. There was a period of 11 minutes, between 3:14 and 3:25 in the morning, where the image was corrupted. Not dark, not blank, but corrupted, a visual static that I had never seen a camera produce, as though something had interfered with the recording at the level of the sensor. Asterisk, I sent the footage to a friend who works in video production. He said he had never seen that particular type of artifact and asked what camera I was using and whether there was a wireless device nearby. I said yes, my phone was on the nightstand. He said that could cause it. He did not sound convinced. Asterisk, on the 31st day I woke at 3 in the morning and the smell was so strong it had a texture, and I turned on every light in the apartment and opened the closet. And there were 6 sets plus 3 individual marks. 33. I stood in the lit apartment in the middle of the night and felt something I had not felt since I was a child. A physical certainty that I was not alone. Not a thought, but a sensation running along the skin of my arms and the back of my neck. A knowledge the body produces independently of the mind. I did not see anything. There was nothing to see. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. Every object in place, every door where I had left it. But the feeling did not pass. It sat in the room with me, dense and patient. And I stood with all the lights on until dawn came through the windows and it thinned and then was gone. Asterisk, I was packed by noon. I left most of what I'd brought. I took my sister's photograph off the wall, took my laptop and my camera and my phone and the clothes I needed. And I walked out and did not close the door behind me. Mrs. Farwell's door opened as I passed it. She looked at my bag and at my face and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, quietly, as though confirming something she already knew, 33. I stopped walking. I looked at her. She nodded once and closed her door. I walked down the 4 flights of stairs and out of the building, and I did not look back at the facade. And I have not gone back, and I have not been able to reach Mrs. Farwell since. Because her phone is disconnected, and the landlord tells me, in a tone that does not invite further questions, that the apartment across the hall has been vacant for over 2 years.